My parents threw me out at 17 with nothing but a backpack, and their cruel prediction that I would come crawling back within a month begging for forgiveness. 9 years later, when my phone exploded with their desperate calls pleading for help, I had become everything they said I could never be. What happened next proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while watching your enemies destroy themselves. I am Marcus, and I am 26 now, but this story begins when I was 17 during my final year of high school in the small manufacturing town of Millbrook. I was never the perfect son my parents Daniel and Patricia wanted. My father worked as a supervisor at the local steel plant, and my mother managed the front desk at a dental office. They were not wealthy, but we lived comfortably in our modest neighborhood, and they had constructed an entire blueprint for my future. Their plan was simple and non-negotiable. I would earn excellent grades, attend the state university like my father had done, marry a nice local girl, and produce 2.5 children while living their version of the American dream. The only problem was that I despised traditional education. Not because I lacked intelligence, since I achieved decent grades when I applied myself, but because I had undiagnosed ADHD and sitting motionless for hours, while teachers droned about subjects that held no end. Terrace for me felt like psychological torture. What truly excited me was working with my hands, building things and solving mechanical problems. When I was 15, I spent an entire summer helping our neighbor Roberto renovate his workshop, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely skilled at something meaningful. My parents absolutely hated this passion, and every time I mentioned possibly pursuing construction or learning a skilled trade, my mother would develop this pinched expression, like I had announced my intention to become a professional garbage collector. My father would deliver lengthy lectures about living up to my potential and how people of our social standing did not work with their hands. Looking back, I realized they were obsessed with maintaining appearances among their friends and wanted to brag about their son, the college graduate, not their son, the blue-collar tradesman. The tension in our household had been building for months as I worked part-time at a local hardware store after school, carefully saving money because my instincts warned me I might need financial independence soon. My grades were declining because I had honestly stopped caring about academic performance, and every dinner conversation devolved into arguments about college applications, or my future, or why I was supposedly throwing my life away. The breaking point arrived in April, approximately 6 weeks before graduation. I had been accepted to the state university, since my parents had essentially completed the application process for me. But I had also been researching a specialized trade program for construction management. This program was significantly less expensive, required less time to complete, and actually taught practical skills that genuinely interested me. I had been accepted, and they were offering me a partial scholarship set on a portfolio of projects I had assembled showcasing my mechanical abilities. I decided to inform my parents about this opportunity during dinner, which turned out to be a catastrophically poor decision. The moment I mentioned trade school, my father slammed his fork down so forcefully it bounced off his plate, while my mother immediately began crying as if I had announced a terminal diagnosis. What followed was the most vicious argument we had ever experienced. My father called me ungrateful and accused me of spitting in the face of all their sacrifices for my education. My mother kept repeating that she was disappointed and could not understand where they had gone wrong in raising me. When I attempted to explain why I was excited about this construction program, my father interrupted me and said something I will never forget. No son of mine is going to waste his life like some common laborer. If you are too stupid to recognize the opportunity you are throwing away, then maybe you are not the son we thought we raised. I completely lost control and told them I was sick of living my entire existence to fulfill their dreams instead of my own. I explained that I was nearly an adult and had the right to make my own life choices, and that they never actually listened to what I wanted or needed. We were all screaming at this point, and the argument became increasingly ugly, with accusations and insults flying in every direction. Finally, my father told me that if I was not going to follow their rules and their predetermined plan for my future, I could pack my belongings and get out of their house immediately. I think he expected me to back down and apologize like I had done countless times before during smaller disagreements. Instead, I went upstairs, grabbed the emergency bag I had already packed because my paranoid instincts had warned me this confrontation was inevitable, and stuffed as many clothes as possible into it. I also grabbed my laptop, the cash I'd been saving, which totaled about $1,200, and my important legal documents, including my birth certificate and social security card, that I had already collected in preparation for this possibility. When I came downstairs carrying my bags, my parents looked genuinely shocked, as if they could not believe I was actually following through on leaving their home. My mother started her usual manipulation tactics, saying I was making a huge mistake and that I thought I knew everything at 17, but had no real understanding of how difficult adult life would be. My father simply stood by the front door with his arms crossed in a defensive posture. As I walked toward the exit, my mother called after me with absolute certainty in her voice that I would be back begging within a month, because I had no idea how harsh the real world could be for someone without family support. She had this smirk on her face that communicated her complete confidence in my inevitable failure, and it broke something fundamental inside me. My father did not even look at me directly, but simply slammed the door as soon as I stepped outside onto the porch. I stood on our front lawn for several minutes, feeling completely numb, while light rain began falling, which felt dramatically appropriate for the moment. I remember thinking that this was exactly the kind of melodramatic situation that happened in movies right before the protagonist either completely failed or achieved incredible success. Then I called my friend Connor, whose parents were actually decent human beings, who understood that love should not be conditional on obedience. Those first few days after leaving home were a complete blur of confusion and panic. Connor's parents allowed me to sleep on their couch, but I understood this could not be a permanent arrangement since I was still attending school, trying to graduate while simultaneously figuring out where I would live long term, how I would afford food, and basically how to function as an independent adult overnight. I could not focus on anything academic and kept having these sudden moments where I would realize with complete horror that I was technically homeless at 17 years old. I experienced panic attacks in the school bathroom, but one thing kept me motivated, which was pure stubborn anger and determination. There was absolutely no way I was going to prove my parents right by crawling back to them, defeated and broken. Connor's mother helped me apply for emergency assistance since I was legally classified as an unaccompanied minor. The guidance counselor at school, who was one of the few adults who had ever actually listened to me, helped me understand what legal steps I needed to take to become emancipated from my parents. I increased my hours at the hardware store and picked up a second job washing dishes at a local restaurant. The most difficult aspect was not even the practical challenges of survival, but the emotional devastation of realizing that most families do not function the way mine did. I would see other students with their normal supportive families and hear classmates complaining about minor disagreements with parents who still loved them unconditionally at the end of the day. I gradually understood that what my parents had done was not normal parenting, and that most parents do not threaten to kick their children out for wanting to pursue different career paths than the ones their parents had selected. I realized that the way they had always made their love feel conditional on my complete obedience was not how healthy family relationships were supposed to function. About 3 weeks after I left home, my mother sent me a text message, but not to apologize or ask if I was surviving okay. Instead, she wrote that when I was ready to apologize and accept their help with their conditions attached, I could return home. I did not respond to this message. A week later, my father called and left a voicemail saying essentially the same thing. They were so confident that I would fail spectacularly that they were simply waiting for me to come crawling back so they could deliver their inevitable lecture about how they had been right all along. I graduated from high school while living on Connor's couch, and my parents attended the graduation ceremony to maintain appearances in our small community, I suppose. They attempted to speak with me afterward, but I simply walked away because I had absolutely nothing to say to them at that point. By June, I had saved enough money to rent a terrible apartment with 2 other guys. It was genuinely a dump with serious problems, but it was the first place that was actually mine, where no one could kick me out as long as I paid my portion of the rent on time. I enrolled in the construction management trade program using my scholarship and working almost full-time to pay for living expenses and tuition. It was absolutely exhausting, but every time I wanted to give up, I would remember my mother's confident smirk and my father's slammed door and somehow find the energy to continue pushing forward. That first year living independently was the most challenging thing I had ever experienced in my life. I was constantly lonely, scared, and physically exhausted from working multiple jobs while attending classes. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep because I missed having any kind of family support, even my dysfunctional one. There were mornings when I woke up and could not find the motivation to get out of bed, but I forced myself to get up every single time. The most important thing is that I never went back begging. Not after 1 month, not after 6 months, not ever. The first few months living in that terrible apartment with my roommates were genuinely nightmarish. After staying at Connor's place for those initial weeks, I had managed to find this absolutely horrible apartment with 2 other guys. One was Marcus, who worked night shifts so I barely saw him, and the other was Tyler, who I suspected was dealing drugs. But he minded his own business and paid his rent reliably, so I did not ask questions. The apartment had cockroaches that would literally seem to wave at you when you turned on the kitchen lights. The shower would randomly switch to ice-cold water mid-rinse, which resulted in a lot of screaming, while shampoo ran into my eyes. The walls were so thin that I knew way too much about our neighbors' relationship problems. But the important thing was that it was mine, or at least 1/3 mine, and no one could kick me out as long as I maintained my rent payments. I was working 2 absolutely terrible jobs at the hardware store in the evenings and at the restaurant on weekend. Between work and trying to complete my trade school program, I was sleeping maybe 4 hours per night. My diet consisted basically of instant noodles, eggs, and whatever leftover food I could take from the restaurant. I lost about 20 pounds during those first few months and probably looked like a walking corpse most days. The strangest part was seeing social media posts from people my age living their best lives with college parties and family vacations and all that normal stuff, while I was trying to figure out if I could skip doing laundry for another week because the laundromat required quarters, and I needed those quarters for bus fare. My parents attempted to contact me a few times during this period, but always with the same condescending energy, asking when I was going to stop this nonsense and come home to accept their help and follow their plan. They never once asked if I was okay, or if I had enough food, or if I needed any kind of emotional support. I remember my father actually showed up at the hardware store once about 3 months after I had left home. I was restocking supplies when my coworker told me some man in business casual clothing was asking for me at the front counter. I looked out and saw him standing there looking completely out of place among the paint cans and lumber. I hid in the stock room until he finally left and watched through the window as he stood in the parking lot for 15 minutes before getting in his car and driving away. He never came back to try to see me again. Things started to shift in a positive direction about 4 months after I became independent. There was this regular customer at the hardware store named Santiago, who was always purchasing supplies for different renovation projects. One day he needed help finding some specific plumbing parts, and I ended up not just locating them, but explaining exactly how to install them properly, and even drawing him a detailed diagram. It turned out that Santiago owned a renovation and repair business, focusing mostly on kitchens and bathrooms. He said I clearly understood the technical aspects, and asked if I had ever considered helping him with some projects. The pay was significantly better than the hardware store, and it was actually related to what I was learning in my trade school program. It felt like the first genuine opportunity I had received since leaving home. Santiago was completely different from my father in that he did not look down on people who worked with their hands, but instead took tremendous pride in skilled craftsmanship. He would literally stop in the middle of installing a faucet to show me the proper technique for setting gaskets or explain why one approach was superior to another. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like someone actually recognized potential in me, not just what they wanted me to become. Around the 6th mark, my parents changed their tactics completely. My mother started sending text messages saying she missed me, and my father sent a message saying they were willing to compromise on my education if I moved back home. To be honest, this just made me angry all over again, because they were seriously expecting me to give up the independence I had fought so hard to achieve, just because they were now graciously allowing me to make some of my own choices. I was not interested in their compromise. I finished my first year of trade school with solid grades, proving that I was not too stupid for education, after all, but just needed to be learning subjects I actually cared about. Santiago started giving me more responsibility and better pay, and I moved out of the cockroach apartment into a slightly better place with just one roommate. This was a nursing student named Aiden who was nearly as financially struggling as me, but at least understood basic hygiene and cleaning responsibilities. By 19, I had earned my first professional certification and was making decent money. It was not enough to live luxuriously, but sufficient to buy actual groceries, pay all my bills on time, and even start saving a little money for the future. Santiago began recommending me for independent side jobs on weekends, doing small repairs and installations, which helped me build my own reputation and client base. The interesting thing about working in people's homes is that you observe a lot about how healthy families actually function. I would be installing light fixtures and overhear parents encouraging their children, praising them for good grades on tests, or hugging them just because they loved them. I would see photographs on walls showing family vacations, graduation ceremonies, and silly everyday moments that normal families share. It was incredibly eye-opening and made me realize how fundamentally messed up my own family dynamics had always been. When I was almost 20, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, and I have no idea how she discovered my address, probably through some mutual social media connections. I almost did not recognize her standing there in my doorway because she looked older and more worn down somehow. I let her inside because I did not know what else to do, and the entire interaction was extremely awkward. She looked around my apartment with this expression that was not quite disgust, but definitely like she was mentally cataloging all the ways my life was inferior to what she had planned for me. She asked me these superficial questions about what I was doing and how I was living, and then got to the real reason for her visit. My father had been passed over for a promotion at the steel plant, and they were struggling financially and wanted to know if I could help them out with money. The complete audacity of this request actually made me laugh out loud. 2 years earlier, they had thrown me out and told me I would fail on my own, and now they wanted me to bail them out of their financial problem. I told her I was still establishing myself professionally and could not spare any money. She left, looking annoyed like I had failed some kind of test, and did not even acknowledge that I had successfully made it on my own, despite their predictions. After that visit, I went through a strange emotional period where I started questioning everything. Was I being too harsh by keeping them at a distance? Was I wrong to refuse their attempts at reconciliation? But then I would remember how they had treated me, and how they had never actually apologized for kicking me out, and I would get angry all over again. My roommate Aiden noticed I was struggling emotionally, and introduced me to his friend Lucy, who was studying psychology. She became one of my closest friends, and helped me understand that what I had experienced was actually a form of emotional abuse. She explained that the way my parents had always made their love conditional on my complete obedience to their plans was not normal or healthy behavior. Talking with Lucy helped me work through some of my anger and begin the healing process. By 21, I was doing well enough financially to move into my own place. It was just a small one-bedroom apartment and nothing fancy, but it was completely mine, with no roommates and no parents. The day I moved in, I sat on my secondhand furniture and literally cried because I never thought I would achieve this level of independence when I was standing on that lawn with my bags at 17 years old. Around this time, Santiago offered me more stable work with actual benefits, including health insurance for the first time since I had left home. He was getting more business and needed reliable help, and it felt like a huge vote of confidence in my abilities. Honestly, his approval meant more to me than any approval from my parents ever had. Meanwhile, my parents kept trying to reconnect, but always on their terms. They would invite me to holiday dinners but make pointed comments about my life choices. They would offer help that I never accepted because it always came with strings attached. Every interaction left me feeling emotionally drained and angry, so eventually I started limiting contact to occasional text messages and maybe one visit per year. What they never seemed to understand was that I was actually building a genuinely good life for myself. It did not look anything like what they had planned for me, but it was solid and meaningful. I had work that I enjoyed and that paid my bills reliably. I had friends who accepted me for who I actually was, rather than who they wanted me to be. I was building something real and authentic that belonged to me. By 23, I had completed additional professional certifications and had become Santiago's most trusted employee for certain types of complex projects. We worked extremely well together, and he started discussing bigger opportunities and potential business partnerships in the future. That was also when I met Lydia, who needed some electrical repairs done in her apartment, and Santiago sent me to handle the job. She was smart, funny, and did not take any nonsense from anyone. We started dating, and for the first time I allowed someone to really know me completely, including all the baggage and history with my family situation. Instead of running away from my complicated past, she understood it because her own parents were not perfect, either, though nowhere near as controlling as mine had been. When my parents heard through social media that I was in a serious relationship, they suddenly became very interested in my life again. They started following me on Instagram after years of completely ignoring my existence, and wanted to meet Lydia and play happy families as if nothing had ever happened. I kept them at a safe distance, because Lydia deserved better than to be dragged into their psychological games and manipulation tactics. 4 years after being kicked out, I was in a completely stable situation with my own apartment, a healthy relationship, and a career I had built entirely on my own terms. My parents' prediction that I would come crawling back within a month could not have been more spectacularly wrong. But the story does not end there, because just when I thought I had finally moved beyond their influence, things were about to get complicated in ways I never anticipated. By the time I was 24, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal for the first time since leaving home. I had been working steadily, building experience and saving money whenever possible. Nothing glamorous, mostly skilled labor, but it paid all my bills and kept me moving forward professionally. My apartment was a small studio with a kitchenette that barely fit a mini refrigerator and microwave, but it belonged to me completely, with no roommates and no parents telling me what to do. I was scrolling through social media one evening when a notification appeared showing that my cousin Madison had tagged me in a photo from some family gathering I obviously was not invited to attend. I did not think much about it initially until I noticed my parents in the background of the photo. My mother was wearing this fake smile I recognized from childhood, and my father was probably telling one of his same 5 boring stories he always repeated at social events. But the strange thing was that on the table next to them was a framed photograph of me from my high school graduation ceremony. These people had kicked me out and barely contacted me, except when they wanted something, and now they were displaying my photo like we were some happy, loving family. I called Madison immediately, and she told me that they talked about me all the time at family events, always telling everyone how proud they were of my success and accomplishments. The complete audacity of this revisionist history was absolutely incredible to me. It was like they were living in an alternate reality where they had not told me I would be crawling back within a month, or slammed the door in my face. Around this time I met Lydia, and it was not in some romantic movie way, but we were both waiting in an extremely long line at a retail store, and started complaining about how slow the self-checkout process was. She had this way of speaking where she did not filter her thoughts, but just shared whatever came to mind, which I found refreshing after years of people being fake or manipulative. We exchanged social media information, and started texting regularly, and our personalities just clicked naturally. On our 3rd date we ended up discussing our families, and I opened up about my situation with my parents. I expected the usual awkward response, but instead she told me about how her stepfather had exhibited similar controlling behavior, though not as extreme as my parents. She understood my experience in a way that most people could not relate to, and that night we stayed awake until 3 in the morning just talking about our life. For the first time since leaving home, I did not feel like my family drama was some dark secret I had to hide from potential romantic partners. A few months into our relationship, my water heater decided to die in a dramatic fashion, and I came home to find water seeping under my bathroom door. I had to shut off the main water valve and spent 3 days taking ice-cold showers at the gym while waiting for my landlord to arrange repairs. Lydia suggested I stay at her place during this time, but I was not ready for that level of relationship commitment yet. The independent mindset I had developed was difficult to compromise even in situations where it would have been practical. Around this time, my old high school friend Connor got engaged, and I was invited to attend the wedding ceremony. I had not seen most of these people in years, and honestly I was nervous about what they would think of my life choices. Would they judge me as the guy who had failed because he did not go to college and disappeared from their social circle? But when I arrived at the wedding with Lydia, everyone was completely normal and genuinely interested when I explained my career in construction and renovation work. There was no judgment or comparison to some imaginary life I should have been living instead. Then came an awkward moment when Connor's mother, who had allowed me to stay on their couch right after I got kicked out, pulled me aside privately. She told me that my parents had been asking mutual acquaintances about me, apparently having run into her at the grocery store, and spent 20 minutes fishing for information about where I was living, what kind of work I was doing, and whether I was financially stable. That last question about my finances set off immediate alarm bells in my mind, because I knew my parents well enough to recognize when they were planning something. Sure enough, exactly 1 week later, my mother sent me a text message completely out of nowhere. She wrote that my father and her were having a small gathering for Memorial Day, and it would be lovely if I could attend and bring my friend if I wanted to. She called Lydia my friend rather than my girlfriend, like she could not acknowledge that Lydia was an important person in my life. The timing of this invitation was extremely suspicious, coming right after they had been asking other people about my financial situation. I showed Lydia the text message, and she immediately raised an eyebrow, Instead, it seemed like they wanted something specific from me. I decided to attend the gathering, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I was still seeking some kind of closure that I had not found yet. Lydia agreed to come with me for moral support, even though she predicted this had disaster written all over it. Walking into my childhood home was an absolutely surreal experience, because everything looked exactly the same as when I had left. Same furniture, same photographs on the walls, including that graduation picture, and the same smell of my mother's apple cinnamon air freshener that had always given me headaches. But I felt like a visitor in a place that had never really been my home rather than someone returning to familiar territory. The small gathering consisted of my parents, my aunt and uncle, and my father's work friend Roberto and his wife. Everyone acted completely normal, like I was just a son who had been away at college for a few years, rather than someone who had been kicked out and survived independently. The entire time I kept waiting for them to reveal their real agenda, and it finally came after dinner when my father asked me to join him in his study. This was that sacred space I had never been allowed to enter as a child without explicit permission. He started with small talk about the economy and how things were tough for working families everywhere, and then finally got to the actual point. He explained that he had been downsized at the steel plant after 27 years with the same company, and they had replaced him with a recent college graduate who would work for half his salary. The irony was not lost on me, since he had spent all those years pushing me toward college, and now he was bitter about college graduates taking jobs from experienced workers. He did not directly ask me for money, but kept hinting about their temporary financial difficulties and how family members should support each other during hard times. I just sat there thinking about the night they had thrown me out, and my mother's confident smirk, and her absolute certainty that I would be back begging within a month. I told him I would think about his situation, and that was all I could manage without saying something I would regret later. Lydia and I left soon after, and in the car she looked at me and said that was the most passive-aggressive dinner she had ever survived. For the next few weeks, text messages from my mother became more frequent, asking how I was doing and whether I had thought about what my father had mentioned. She also asked if I needed their old dining room table, since they were updating their house, which was obviously code for selling furniture to pay their bills. Meanwhile, my life was actually improving significantly. I had found a well-paying job at a local construction company with stable hours and actual benefits. Lydia and I were getting more serious and discussing maybe finding a larger apartment together, since my studio was basically a closet, and her roommate was driving her crazy with inconsiderate behavior. Then my mother posted something on social media that changed everything completely. She wrote this long dramatic post about trusting in divine providence during unemployment and financial hardship that was obviously designed to generate sympathy and offers of help from friends and family. The comment section filled up with relatives and church friends offering prayers and emotional support. But what really got my attention was the last paragraph of her post. She wrote that they were blessed to have their son Marcus supporting them through this trial, and that family truly is everything. I nearly choked on my coffee because I had not agreed to provide any financial support and had not given them a single dollar yet. Here she was publicly announcing that I was already helping them financially. The comments were full of people praising what a good son I was and how proud my parents must be. I called her immediately and asked what the hell that social media post was supposed to mean. She acted surprised by my anger and claimed she was just expressing gratitude for my emotional support and that people had assumed the financial part on their own. But I knew exactly what she was doing, which was creating public pressure, so I would feel obligated to help them avoid embarrassment in front of their friends and extended family. That night, Lydia found me creating a spreadsheet of my personal finances, trying to figure out if I could afford to help my parents without completely derailing my own financial goals. She sat down next to me, took my hand, and asked what advice I would give a friend who was in my exact situation. That question hit me hard because if someone told me their parents had kicked them out at 17 and barely contacted them for years, except when it was convenient, and were now expecting financial support, I would tell them they did not owe those people anything. So I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating at the same time. I sent my mother a text message explaining that I would not be providing financial support for their situation. I acknowledged that what they were going through was difficult, but pointed out that I was still building my own life and still recovering from being thrown out as a teenager. I suggested some local resources for job seekers and financial assistance, including the same programs I had been forced to use years earlier when they kicked me out. Her response was a single word, "Okay," followed by complete silence for 3 weeks. Then yesterday my phone exploded with notifications including text messages, phone calls, and voicemails from my parents and various relatives I barely knew. Apparently my parents' financial situation had deteriorated from bad to catastrophic. My father still had not found stable employment. They were facing possible foreclosure on their house, and somehow this had all become my personal problem to solve, according to multiple family members. My aunt left me a voicemail saying I needed to step up and be the man your father raised you to be. The irony of that statement, considering they had kicked me out for not following their exact life plan, made me laugh in a way that probably was not entirely psychologically healthy. Lydia and I stayed awake late, discussing boundaries and family obligations, and the difference between forgiveness and enabling destructive behavior. We talked about what I could live with both emotionally and financially if I decided to help them, versus what I could live with if I refused to help them at all. I still was not completely sure what I was going to do, because part of me wanted to help despite everything since they were still my parents. But another part of me remembered standing on that lawn with my bags while my mother expressed absolute certainty that I would fail without their support. The roles had completely reversed in a way that neither of us could have imagined 9 years earlier. Now, I was the one with financial stability, and they were the ones who could not manage without help. I decided to meet with them the next day alone at a neutral location like a coffee shop to discuss the situation and establish clear boundaries. I had some specific conditions in mind if I decided to provide any assistance and non-negotiable boundaries that would have to be respected. Life had become incredibly strange, because 9 years ago, they thought I could not survive a month without them, and now they were the ones who could not manage without me. I was not sure if this was karma, or just the universe demonstrating its twisted sense of humor, but I was about to find out exactly how this family drama would finally resolve itself after nearly a decade of conflict and misunderstanding.